Welcome to part 3 of our video series on excretion and homeostasis. In part 1 we would have covered the function of the kidney, specifically the subunits of the kidney, the nephron, and how that goes about maintaining a constant balance in terms of the water concentration of the blood. We looked at in part 2 the mechanism for negative feedback, and we specifically outlined how negative feedback works in the kidneys. So we are still going to look at negative feedback in this video, but we are going to be focusing on how homeostasis is maintained as it relates to blood glucose level and also temperature. So as we speak about temperature, we know that the organ that regulates temperature in humans is definitely the skin. To better understand how this organ works, we need to know the function of each part of the organ. So we are going to look at the structure of the skin. So on screen you are seeing a diagram of the skin. There are a lot of parts labeled here, but we will focus on the major ones. Now, this is what we call a hair follicle, and it is controlled by a muscle that is attached within the skin, and the function of this muscle is to raise the hair follicle. So sometimes you'll see your hair lying down, or it is upright. When it is upright, it functions by trapping a layer of warm air around your skin to keep you warm. So even the hair follicles help in maintaining temperature. When it is down, we allow for more warm air to escape, and so it would reduce the temperature. We have the sweat pore, which is attached to the sweat duct, which comes from the sweat gland. So the sweat gland produces sweat. It passes through the duct and escapes through the sweat pore. So the sweat on your skin is coming from the sweat gland through the sweat duct and into and outside of the skin through the sweat pore. Beside the hair follicle is a sebaceous gland, and the sebaceous gland produces what is called sebum, which is an oily substance that moisturizes the skin, keeps it moist, allows it to have a waxy-like coating to prevent moisture from escaping. It prevents bacteria from passing through that layer, and it nourishes the skin to prevent it from drying out. We have beside that nerve endings, and obviously they would be responsible for detecting touch, but more specifically as it relates to maintaining temperature, it would detect the temperature change in the environment. So we have the epidermis right here, which is the upper layer, the outer layer, epi meaning outer, the outer layer of the dermis. So the dermis consists of the epidermis, then you have the main section referred to as dermis, and it is the section below the epidermis. And below that there is the subcutaneous layer, which mainly consists of fat cells, and these fat cells, fat is very important in insulation, which means maintaining body heat, retaining body heat. So in cold temperature, the fat cells become very essential in survival as they allow for heat to be stored and retained in the body. There are also blood vessels, and of course blood vessels would transport the necessary nutrients, oxygen and nutrients, to the skin, but they also play a role in maintaining temperature, as they can constrict or relax to allow for the body to respond to temperature. And we will look at how constriction and relaxation allows for change or maintenance of body temperature. So there is also the Malpighian layer, which produces melanin, which causes the skin to have its color. So the more melanin is produced, the darker the skin will be. And those are essentially the important parts of the skin that will help to maintain the temperature. So let us look now at the feedback mechanism, negative feedback mechanism for temperature. Right, so we are looking now at the negative feedback mechanism for maintaining normal body temperature. And as you can see, like most feedback mechanisms, normal is somewhere in the center of the cycle or the diagram. Now, the normal body temperature is 37 degrees Celsius, but this is not always the experience of an individual. Several things can cause the body temperature to change slightly. It will not be by a lot because the body tries to maintain the regular body temperature. Now, at 37 degrees Celsius, everything is okay, but things can change. You can be in a cold environment, or you can be in a very hot environment, and this will cause changes in temperature. So let's look at what would happen if, for example, you are in a very warm environment. So because you're in a warm environment, what will happen is that your body temperature will be raised sometimes slightly, but in cases it can be significantly. But because of this feedback mechanism, negative feedback mechanism, your body keeps the temperature change within a certain range at all times, which is essential for our survival. So in a warm environment, your skin firstly produces sweat, and sweat contains mostly water, and the water is good at retaining heat, and when we sweat, heat is removed from the body. So sweat carries away some of the heat inside our body. There is also a response to the high temperature, which is vasodilation, and dilation simply means that the walls of the blood vessels expand so that more blood can flow through it, and when more blood flows through the walls of the blood vessels, it carries more blood, and because blood contains heat as well, heat is released through the blood vessels, and heat can be coming from internal organs as well, especially the liver, which produces a lot of heat because it carries out very important metabolic processes, and it carries out a lot of metabolic processes. So the liver generates most of the heat from inside our body. A third thing that happens is that there is a slowing down of respiration. When we are too warm or too hot, our body slows down. So the liver, as I mentioned, would slow down, and the muscle cells, which would be producing a lot of heat as well, would slow down, and therefore they would reduce the production of heat in the body. So that would result in a drop in the temperature, and this continues until the temperature reaches 37 degrees Celsius. Then the body, the skin, the liver, and other muscles, and all of these organs will then return to a state where they are functioning at normal. So the skin returns by undoing the vasodilation and reducing the amount of sweat. The liver would pick up pace again, and the muscles would pick up pace to work as they were working before there was a raise in temperature. So they are now at normal again. But in the case where the temperature drops below, the opposite of all of this occurs, and the opposite is that the skin stops producing sweat because you don't want to lose any warmth from the sweat, so you stop producing sweat. That is why you never sweat when you are in a very chilly environment, or you really should not be sweating, right? Under normal circumstances. There is vasoconstriction instead of vasodilation. This should be vasoconstriction, not vasoconstruction. Vasoconstriction occurs. So the walls of the blood vessels tighten, and so it reduces the amount of blood that is passing through, and we know that the more blood passes through, the more heat is given off. So when we reduce the amount of blood that passes through, we decrease the amount of heat that is produced. Respiration speeds up because respiration produces heat as a byproduct, so the liver would work a little harder, the muscles would work a little harder, and the muscles can work a little harder by shivering. Shivering is a way in which the muscles work harder to produce more heat so that we can feel more comfortable in a cold environment. So shivering generates heat and the muscles of the body would shiver. Right, so in a case where the temperature is too hot, the follicles of hair on our skin would be lowered, they would be lying flat or almost flat so that air around them can escape. But when we are too cold, they would stand up to trap the air that is the air that is escaping. So the warm air from the body is trapped around to form a layer around the skin that contains warm air. And when these occur, temperature rises and it goes back to the normal 37 degrees Celsius. So that is how the skin helps in maintaining homeostasis, by controlling the temperature. That is its role in maintaining homeostasis. The skin is responsible for temperature control. In the final section under homeostasis, we'll be looking at the pancreas and its role in maintaining blood glucose level, or the amount of sugar that is found in the blood. We know that we don't want to have too much, neither do we want to have too little, because the muscles and other cells of the body depend on sugar for the process of respiration to be carried out. So normal blood glucose, we start right here. If the blood glucose increases, such as if you should eat something very sweet, the pancreas will send out or secrete what is called insulin. The insulin therefore sends a message to the cells of the body and tell them to absorb the glucose for respiration. So insulin does two things. It tells the cells of the body to absorb more glucose and use it in respiration, and at the same time it tells the cells of the liver to convert glucose, the excess glucose, to convert it to what is called glycogen and store it as glycogen in case or when the body should need it again. It is there. So the cells of the body take up some of the glucose and use it in respiration, and also the liver converts some of it to glycogen, so the level of glucose in the blood is decreased and we end up with normal blood glucose level. The opposite of this is when there is too little blood glucose. So for example, you have not eaten in a long while and your body has used up most of the glucose in your bloodstream. This is what happens. So the pancreas now secretes another hormone that works in opposition to insulin, or it is the opposite. It does the opposite of what insulin would do, and that hormone is called glucagon. So glucagon converts, or it sends a message to the liver cells and tells the cells of the liver to convert the glycogen back into glucose and release it into the bloodstream. So the glycogen that was stored, glucose that was converted to glycogen and stored, is now converted back to glucose when glucagon is released from the pancreas. The pancreas sends glucagon and says, hey, you need to convert the glycogen back to glucose, because the cells of the body, they are short on glucose, they are short on sugar, and they need it to be released. So that is what happens, and then there's more glucose in the bloodstream and the blood glucose level increases, which brings it back to normal. So that is how homeostasis is maintained in the body, as it relates to the glucose level and as it relates to the temperature and also maintenance of blood concentration. Thank you for watching this